Distinguished panelists, guests, ladies and gentlemen, the key challenge for India is to continue to grow at 9 to 10% per annum for the next 3 to 4 decades. If it continues to grow at this rate, then only it will be able to lift vast segments of its population above the poverty line. And historically, this has been done in the past by Japan post-World War II. It was done later by a smaller country like Korea, Singapore, and recent times by China. And when this happens, in the next 3 decades, India will become an urban majority country. Close to 500 million people will get into the urbanization process. And when India urbanizes, India must industrialize at the speed of 15 to 16% per annum year after year after year. And this is a big challenge because when this happens in the next 3 decades, 70% of India's population will be below the age of 35. And this is a demographic transition which rarely ever happens in history. So the challenge for India is to industrialize, to urbanize, and to consistently grow over a long period. Now, India has been a very reluctant urbanizer. It has been a very slow starter. But it has huge advantages if it can use technology to leapfrog. When cities were made in America and Europe, water and gas were cheaply available, and therefore, people lived in one part and they drove 100 kilometers away to their place of work. And that is why cities in America emit the highest amount of CO2 emission. Today's cities have to be compact, dense, vertical, sustainable, smart, what the Japanese call as smart cities. So in the next 30 years, in the next 3 decades, Indians will be creating a completely new India. We will be a large working site in many places. And when this happens, it's very important that Indians work in partnership with Japan and use Japanese technology to advance and grow. The Japanese companies, each one of them, whether you look at Mitsubishi, Toshiba, Hitachi, Kyocera, Solar Future, Sharp, each one of them is technology and outstanding company. They are amongst the world's finest companies in terms of technology. But there are two important things we must recognize. That when the rest of the world was being made across America, across Europe, across Asia, across Japan, everything was being made under a format called EPC contracts. When Indian infrastructure will be made, 70 to 80% will be under private-public partnership concept. And private-public partnership is all about risk-taking. Risk taken by those who are best equipped to take risk. And therefore, the Japanese companies must take more risks. And Japanese companies must learn to manage their bottom lines to be able to compete in countries like India. I'm a great friend of Japanese companies. I work very closely with them. I'm also a great admirer of the Japanese technology. And therefore, I strongly feel that it's very important that for Japanese companies to become a very major player in India, we must see what has happened in the last 2 decades. When I was growing up, we were all very familiar with Japanese companies. We grew up with Japanese products. In the last 2 decades in India, you must look back and see that in the infrastructure sector, 70% of India's power equipment is coming from China. 80% of India's telecom equipment is coming from China. And the Korean companies, LG, Hyundai, Samsung, in the branded products have penetrated the Indian markets. And I say this as a great friend of Japanese companies, that the Japanese technology is much better, much more durable, and none of the Chinese and Koreans can even compare with the Japanese companies. And therefore, to be able to manage bottom line as far as cost is concerned, it's very important that Japanese companies relocate their manufacturing bases to India, work in partnership, work in joint ventures with Indian companies. And once manufacturing shifts to India of Japanese companies, the cost will automatically fall because Japan has become a high-cost economy. I think the second key issue is about financial package, which will make funding more efficient and enable Japanese companies to participate competitively. And I'm saying that access to long-term debt for Japanese companies, particularly in rupee terms, Japanese companies must be assisted by METI, by the Japanese government to provide long-term debt lending to aggressively bid for infrastructure projects in India to be able to penetrate in the Indian market. This is very important because Indian infrastructure process has just begun, and India offers a very large domestic market base. Now, Japan is both capital and technology abundant, it is labor scarce, and in many ways it complements India's rich spectrum of human capital. India's strength in its software sector lends synergy to Japanese excellence in hardware sector. Japan's small and medium enterprises have started to discover India as a new growth market, and several industries in Japan are in their sunset phase. And they must, to my mind, look at skilled labor in India and relocate to India where they will be able to produce at reasonable costs. I also feel that Japan and India must work together to counterbalance in many ways the growing influence of the Chinese penetration of markets across Africa and Asia. I'm going to be extremely brief, but I really feel that India's infrastructure has just begun, and the beginning is a partnership project with the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor. I think we have a lot to learn from Japan, and a great experience of Japan is the Delhi Metro project. We are great admirers of the Japanese technology. The metro in many ways has taught us how to bring in world-class technology, bring in program management, deliver great infrastructure projects within their time schedules. And therefore, there's a very keen desire on the part of Indian government and of Indians and of the right-thinking Indians and of the Indian companies to work in close partnership with the Japanese companies. I think this potential must be fully tapped, and I think we must use this opportunity of the next 30 years to create a great synergy between India and Japan, where we create a win-win for both India and Japan. The Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor will create several new cities, several new manufacturing and industrial cities where Japanese infrastructure across sectors, solar farms, smart cities, transportation, logistics, where the big revolution will come in the coming years. The next generation technology will enable India to move into the next phase of growth and Japanese companies to rediscover themselves in India. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.